Hi, my name is Sean Neely and welcome back to another episode of The Mortgage Musketeer, where today I'm going to be talking about mortgage tips, advice, tricks for nurses. Yes, finally we're going to take care of those who take care of us. First and foremost, I wanted to give you a heartfelt thank you for all that you do as nurses, especially during this time of the pandemic. A heartfelt thank you. Appreciate what you do. Let me see if I can give you some advice so that after you go through all this, you can meet your dream of home ownership. All right, so I'm going to give you a lot of anecdotal experience because I deal with nurses all the time throughout the state of Kentucky particularly, but especially in Eastern Kentucky and throughout Louisville. So here's what I have experienced and I want to pass it off to you. First and foremost, generally speaking, nurses are considered full-time if they're working 36 hours. So a nurse tends to work 3 12-hour shifts. So what that means is that automatically you're going to be subject to something called a written verification of employment. And the reason for that is because in general 36 hours is typically the cutoff for part-time income. Now, nurses are considered full-time. They fall in a category of their own, and they recognize in the lending industry that nurses work 36 hours a week, and that is considered full-time. But they're still going to get a written verification of employment. What that means to you is, depending on where you work, you need to get a relationship or give your HR a heads up that you're going to be buying a home, and this is why. Most hospitals or most medical institutions, especially big hospitals, use a system called the work number. Okay? The work number is a system that HR puts data into, or some data entry person puts your work history into this system, and then third-party institutions can log into the work number, research that company, pull up your name, and get your work history. Here's the issue. The work history that is entered into the work number is almost never accurate. Normally, I can about wipe my butt with what they put in there, which is sad. It's supposed to be good. It's only as good as what they put in there, and it doesn't necessarily break things down like we need. So, we're going to need somebody at HR or payroll to fill out a form called a written verification of employment, because it's going to go back 2 years. It's going to bring in your overtime pay. It's going to bring in any bonuses, shift differentials. It's going to put all that in there that normally we can't get out of the work number. All right, so that's really important to know, and a lot of them will resist it. So you just got to kind of grease the skids and let them know it's coming. And they deal with it all the time because people buy a house all the time. So why they always give so much grief mainly has to do with the fact that the reason they use the work number is so that they don't have to do this. And that makes sense, and I get it. Unfortunately, lending guidelines and HR and payroll in the medical industry kind of clash. So just know that ahead of time and prepare, get us a good point of contact for somebody that might be willing to help. The second piece to that is nurses only work 36 hours a week, typically, to be considered full-time. That being the case, that's 3 days. That leaves you 4 days. There are many nurses who will then pick up a second job. All right? Don't fault it, but just understand that if you pick up a second job, you got 2 issues. First of all, in order to use 2 jobs, you have to be at both jobs for 2 years, because most people can't maintain 2 jobs for 2 years, and that's the general guideline. So unless you've been working at those 2 jobs for 2 years, you're not going to be able to use both sources of income. The other thing is the second job is typically part-time. And when that happens, in other words, less than 36 hours. And when that happens, again, you typically need 2 years of a part-time job to be able to use that income. So just know that you're going to need 2 years. If you have been working 2 jobs for 2 years, then great, you can combine those income. Now, the other issue that people have with that is, depending on when it is, some people pick up a night shift or whatever, and I've seen it particularly with families, to spend more time during the day. They'll pick up a second shift in the night shift, and when you do that, what happens is people will think, oh, I get paid more in this job, so I'm going to reduce hours at the other, and I'm going to basically use part-time work with more pay than I would at my full-time job with less pay. That's because of shift differentials and things like that. But when you do that, you're actually cutting both of your income and make it very difficult to qualify, because you're part-time here and you're part-time here. Now you have 2 part-time income, and it's kind of a double whammy. All right, so just be cognizant of that. Wherever the most hours or the dollar per hour, wherever you're making the most money, make that your full-time gig. All right, and then you can use the other one as a part-time, because chances are we're only going to be able to use the full-time gig in most instances. So we want to be able to maximize your income, at least for the period of buying this home. All right. Now, the other thing that we see is travel nurses. Okay, travel nurses make really good pay, no doubt about it. However, most of the time, travel nurses negotiate the contracts so that the majority of your pay is in per diem. And the companies like this as well, and it has to do with taxes, right? So if you're getting per diem, for your lodging and meal expenses, then it's not taxed. So that means that when it shows up on your pay stub, it's going to show up as per diem. You're going to have a lot of money in per diem, but you're going to actually have a reduced dollar per hour on your paycheck. What ends up happening is you cannot use per diem for income qualification on a loan. So although you might have a ton of money in your pocket or in your bank account, we can only count your hourly wage. We can't count all the per diem. All right, so be aware of that. If you want to be a travel nurse, buy your home first, then become a travel nurse. Okay, if you are a travel nurse, it's going to be difficult to get you to qualify. So we need you probably, and their contract work. So depending on how long that contract goes, sometimes that creates a little bit of complications as well. And you have to have a history of having been a travel nurse so that you can show a history of continuing to pick up contracts. Now, you and I both know, if you're a travel nurse, that you're going to be able to pick up contracts like that, because people need travel nurses. It's not how it works in the lending industry. So know that you're going to have to show a history of having picked up these contracts, or your contract is going to have an extended period where that's going to be in effect. So travel nurses are tricky. Talk to your loan officer if you're a travel nurse, because you may or may not qualify on your current income. I do know travel nurses who will go from travel nursing, go into a regular nursing job until they buy a home. And then after that, they can do whatever they want. But you have to have stability of income, and we can only use what is on your pay stubs, and we cannot use per diem. Now, having said that, brings me to another issue, is your pay stubs. Okay, so we're going to need at least 30 days of your pay stubs. So on those pay stubs, it's going to break down all of your hours, your shift differentials. It's also going to show your year-to-date income. With a nurse, this year-to-date income is where we run into issues because of the 36-hour rule. Typically they only do that. Although we're getting a written verification of employment, we also have to see where you're at year-to-date on that pay stub, and they're going to figure out, okay, how many hours. They're going to kind of reverse engineer your hours. So if you're supposed to be working 36 hours a week and you're not, you're maybe working 32 to 34, that creates issues. So make sure you're getting at least your full 36, if not more. Okay? And the last thing that I'm going to leave you with, anecdotally, my experience with nurses is assets are one of the hardest things to deal with, and that is your bank account. When you get paid, put the whole thing in your bank account. If you receive a check, make a copy of the check, then deposit the entire thing. Don't deposit and take money out in the same transaction, because we want the copy of the check to match the deposit when we pull the bank statements. The other thing that I see a lot of times with nurses is, I don't know why, but nurses tend to move their money all over the place. Watch this video about what underwriters are looking for in a bank statement, but understand, put your money in, please don't move it from checking to savings and savings to checking and checking to savings into this other account and back to this account and back to checking. I don't know why nurses do this, but I see it all the time. So put your money in the bank and leave it there for at least 2 months. So at least 2 months running up to when you're going to buy a house. Put your money in the bank and let it sit there. Also, cash is the devil. Very first video, here it is. Don't use cash. Put your money in the bank and leave it there. So, if you stay consistent on your job, you use the job that has the most money, you understand we have to get a written verification of employment, and you keep all your money in the bank, and you watch out for that travel nurse catch, you should be able to buy a home. And what I will tell you is that nurses are one of the best buyers that I work with, and the reason for that is because most of you are very driven. You're very focused on what you want, what you need, and how to get there. And if you give them the path, they'll walk that path right to that goal. So I've given you the path to home ownership, and I look very forward to hearing from maybe any success stories. If you want to leave some comments below, I am excited to be helping you, and if you have any questions or comments, I am here to help. All right, leave them below and I'll get back to you. All right, until next time, it's all for one and one for all.